All right, guys, today we're going to be looking at three different sections of notes here for SOL 6A. So you will need to kind of label these as three different sections of notes. We'll be looking at the three branches of government. We got the legislative branch today, and then tomorrow we'll be looking at the executive branch. And then the third section will be the judicial branch. And we've got three branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. And we're going to break these down into three different parts. Now, the way these notes work, they're all part of SOL 6A, but instead of going over all three branches together, we're going to break these down into three different sections of notes, all of which will be in SOL 6A, but like I said, we're going to break these down and do them in three different sections. All right, so the 6A understanding, the good thing here is, guys, it'll only be, you only have to write down the understanding one time, because this goes with all three sections of notes. So again, you won't have to write this down after today. But it says 6A, understanding the Constitution of the United States defines the structure and the powers of the national government. We covered this somewhat in SOL 2 when we built up to the Constitution. The Constitution is our government. The government of the United States is outlined and discussed in the Constitution. And what we're going to be looking at a lot here in SOL 6 is how the Constitution defines the structure and the powers of the government. And one thing we'll be looking at here in a minute is how up on the wall, I've got my charts up on the wall for each branch of government. I'm going to take the camera here in a second and paint it up to the wall. But you will see the structure. The structure of the government is outlined on the wall. And one thing to keep in mind up on the wall, and what we're going to be looking at in SOL 6, you see how I've got legislative, executive, and judicial branches up on the wall. In fact, I'm going to paint that up there right now and show you guys how you've got the legislative branch there, you've got the executive branch there, and then you've got the judicial over here on the far side. In SOL 6, what we're just going to be looking at is the parts that say national, okay? Just the national government. So there's national legislative, there's the national executive, and then you've got the national judicial. We'll be looking at the state and local governments in another SOL, but we're just going to be focusing on the national government here in SOL 6. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward in the next couple of sections. We are only going to be looking at the national government in SOL 6, and we'll discuss that more as we go through it. But we have national, state, and local. Those are the three levels of government. We've got three branches, and we have three levels of government. So everything about the national government is outlined in the Constitution of the United States. It tells us the structure of the government, and it will tell us the powers, and that's what we're going to be looking at here in SOL 6A, what the powers are and what the structure is. The second bullet says the powers held by the government are divided between the national government in Washington, D.C., and the governments of the 50 states. If you go back and look at the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution that we discussed in SOL 2, we talked about how the government, initially all the power was given to the states. The Articles of Confederation had given the powers to the states, and that didn't work. We had to scrap the Articles of Confederation. The states didn't work together, and so they had to scrap that idea. We could not give all the power to the national government because that scared the people. They were afraid that the government would turn into a king, and they would turn into a dictatorship and would tell the people what to do, and people were afraid of that. So what we will learn as we continue to move through SOLs 6, 7, and 8 is how the framers of the Constitution drew up a plan to where the powers could be divided up. Like I said, we'll see as we move through these SOLs how the national government, which is in Washington, D.C., how it has powers, and that's what we'll be looking at throughout SOL 6. And then we'll look at how the state governments have power as well, and that will be what we focus on in SOL 7. And then we'll get more into our local governments like Wise County and Pound and things like that once we get to SOL 8. So again, the Constitution of the United States defines the structure and the powers of the national government. That's what we'll be looking at here in 6A, what the branches look like and what the powers of the branches are, the structure and the powers. Again, the structures are up on the wall. That's what my charts are for, up beside of the TV on the wall. And then the powers held by the government are divided up, and we'll look at that more as we move through SOL 6 and 7. Okay, one thing to know about these videos, I'm about to move on to the next slide. If by some chance you fall behind and can't get everything done, these videos are on YouTube. You will be able to go back and re-watch these and try to get the things down that you might have missed. The notes will also be uploaded into your Google Classroom. So anything you miss, you will have access to go back and look at later. All right, the three branches. Again, this will be another section or another slide that you will only write down here today. The other sections of notes will not include this, even though this all kind of goes together. It says legislative, executive, and judicial powers of the national government are distributed among three distinct and independent branches of government. We have three branches of government in the United States. Those three branches are listed right here: legislative, executive, and judicial. Okay, again, we're going to be looking at those in three different parts throughout SOL 6A. And again, we'll be looking at the structure of these branches, and we'll be looking at how the powers are distributed. We'll be looking at what the powers of these branches of government are. And just to reinforce it, all of this is listed and outlined in the U.S. Constitution. If you want to know what the powers are of the branches, if you want to know how the branches are created and how they're structured, it's in the Constitution. And at the bottom it says this is called separation of powers. That'll be a key concept that we will look at in SOL 6B. In 6B we talk about how the powers are separated, and then we'll talk about a very important concept called checks and balances. Checks and balances will be how the framers of the Constitution prevented a dictatorship. It's going to be how they prevent the president from taking over and turning into a king. It's how they prevent Congress from making all the decisions with no punishment, and how the courts can't take over. It's impossible for the three branches of government in the United States to take over the government because of this concept of separation of powers and checks and balances. So again, we have three branches in the United States government, and we also have three levels in the United States government. And that's what we're going to be looking at throughout SOL 6 and 7 and 8. All right, now we get to the legislative branch, and what this slide basically goes over, this is the structure of the legislative branch of government. The structure of the legislative branch. And again, I'll paint up to the wall here in just a second and show you where this is listed at on the wall. The legislative branch consists of a Congress. It's called Congress. It tells us that in the U.S. Constitution, that our legislative branch is called Congress. Congress is a bicameral legislature. It's a very important word. You'll see it potentially on a test, definitely on one of my tests and on the quiz. And you might want to make a note of this. The word bicameral means two houses. Again, the prefix bi, like bicycle, means two. So bicameral, bi means two, cameral means house. It's a Latin word for house. So bicameral means two houses. So Congress is made up of two houses. Okay, so again, bicameral means two houses. The two houses of Congress are the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives and the Senate. And we'll be looking at a little bit of information about both of those houses on the upcoming slides. But again, if you look up on the wall, I have this structured for you on my diagram up on the wall. So if we pan back up to the wall, you can see right there the legislative branch, the national government is called Congress, and then the two houses of Congress are the House of Representatives and the Senate. So there's the structure of the United States legislative branch. National Congress, and it's made up of two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Again, we'll be looking at information on both of those in the upcoming slides. All right, so for the House of Representatives, again, this is one of the two houses of Congress. The House of Representatives has 435 total members. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives. The number that each state gets in the House of Representatives is based on the population of that state. In other words, the more people that live in a particular state, the more representatives a state gets. So small states that don't have a lot of people don't get a lot of representatives. A state that has a lot of people living in it will get more representatives. The state with the most is the state of California. The state of California has more people living in it than any other state in the United States, so therefore they get more representatives. One key thing to note is every state has to at least get one. So if you don't have a lot of people living in your state, you get at least one representative. States like Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, those states get one representative because they do not have a lot of people living in it. And you can see a diagram or a picture there in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. The state of New Hampshire doesn't have a big population. They get two representatives. The state of Louisiana, they have more people living in that state, and they get 7 representatives. The state of Virginia is kind of an average-sized state. The state of Virginia gets 11 representatives. So the state of Virginia has more people living in it than New Hampshire and Louisiana. So Virginia gets 11 representatives. So when you add up all the states all across the country, there are 435 members in the House of Representatives. If a state gains population and more people move to that state, then they get more representatives. If a state loses population, then they lose representatives. So if Louisiana was to gain people living there, they could go up to 8 if more people move to the state of Louisiana. If people moved out of Louisiana, they could drop down to 6, but it always stays at 435. So there's 435 members in the House of Representatives, and that number that each state gets is based on the population. Population gets how many people live in that state. Okay, as for the Senate, Senate's a little different. There are 100 members total in the Senate. In the Senate, it's a little more prestigious to get into the Senate. It's a little more difficult. There's only 100 total, and each state has 2. Every state has 2. It does not matter if you're Virginia, California, New Hampshire, Louisiana. Every state gets 2. What happened was when they were trying to draw up the Constitution, there was some debate between some of the states. Some states, like Virginia back in the 1700s, wanted the Congress to be based on population. Virginia wanted more representatives in Congress because they had more people living there. A state like New Jersey, on the other hand, didn't like that because New Jersey was a small state. They thought every state should be treated equal. So there was some debate during the Constitutional Convention over how Congress would be made up. Should it be made up on who had more people, or should it be based on every state being equal? And they, like I said, there was a lot of debate back and forth. So what they did was they compromised. In fact, it's called the Great Compromise. And what they compromised and did was they decided, well, rather than make it based on size or based on equality, just create two houses, bicameral. One house, it's based on population. The more people you have, the more representatives you get. In the other house, the Senate, it's based on equality. Every state gets 2 members of the Senate. So again, a state like Rhode Island, which is very small, they get 2 senators. A state like California, which is a large state, they only get 2 senators. But in the other house, the House of Representatives, it's based on population. So the more people that California has, they get more representatives. So again, 2 houses, bicameral, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And as I showed, that is displayed for you up on the wall. I've got the legislative branch under the national government, and it has, again, the breakdown, Congress, and then the 2 parts, Senate and the House of Representatives. All right, now we're going to look at the powers of the branches. We've looked at the structure. Again, the structure's on the wall. The structure of the national government is it's Congress, and then the 2 parts are the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, here are the powers that Congress has. This is their jobs. This is the main thing that the legislative branch takes care of. The first thing the legislative branch does, and probably their main job, is they make the laws for the nation. Congress makes our country's laws. When we get to SOL 6C, we will discuss how they make laws. But for right now, what you need to know is that their main job is that the legislative branch makes the laws. And that's going to be a very important thing to remember as we move through SOL 6, 7, and 8 and get closer to the SOL test. You have to know what the main job of each branch of government is. You learned it in a brief section in 6th grade history where we talked about the main jobs of each branch. And like I said, it was mentioned there. I believe it was even mentioned in another grade, maybe around 3rd grade, you learned a little bit about the branches of government. So it's been something we've covered before, but that's going to be very important for you to remember that the legislative branch makes our laws. Every branch does something in relation to the law. And we'll learn what the executive branch does and the judicial branch does later. But the legislative branch's main job is to make our country's laws. The next thing the legislative branch does is they approve the annual budget. The budget of America is the money that we plan to spend. And the job of the legislative branch is to approve that. We'll find out later on that the president makes the budget. The president gets to decide how to spend the money. He comes up with the plan. Once he makes the plan, he has to give that plan to the legislative branch, and they have to look at it and decide if it's a good plan or not. If they say it is a good plan, they approve it, and that's how we're going to spend the country's money. If the legislative branch says it's not a good plan, they send it back to the president and basically tell the president we need a new plan. We can't go with that plan. We need to spend the money some other way. So this, again, this is going to show kind of what we're going to look at in 6B when we talk about how these branches of government have to work together, and it's what prevents a king. It's what prevents a dictatorship in the United States, is these branches having to work together. So the legislative branch approves the annual budget. To put that in today's kind of, again, this is 2019, where we've got Donald Trump as president. To put this in today's perspective is, Donald Trump, one of his main plans when he ran for office was to build a wall between the United States and Mexico. Well, to build that wall, you need money. So the president can have that plan, but he needs Congress's approval to spend the money on that wall. Without Congress approving the usage of the money, that wall can't get built. So they have to work together to get these things done. So Congress approves the budget. Next thing the Congress does is they confirm presidential appointments. Congress will approve presidential appointments. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I've had students in the past who think that an appointment is like going to the doctor or going to the dentist, like the president has a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment. Congress does not approve of those. If the president needs to go to the doctor, he doesn't need Congress's approval. If he needs to set a dentist appointment, he doesn't need Congress's approval. What an appointment is in this meaning is the president gets to select certain people for certain jobs. Okay, the president's job is to pick people to fill certain jobs. I'll give you some examples. If I scroll back up here and look on the wall again, the president gets to pick the cabinet. Okay, he gets to pick who that will be. The president gets to pick the cabinet leaders. The president also gets to pick who goes into the Supreme Court and these other lower courts that are under the judicial branch. If something happens to a judge and we need a new judge in these courts, the president gets to pick the replacement. And the president gets to pick who goes into the cabinet. So the president gets to pick that. But once he picks that person, Congress gets to vote yes or no as to whether or not that person gets the job or not. So Congress will approve presidential selections or appointments to certain jobs. So again, they're not approving a doctor's appointment. They're not approving a dentist appointment. They're approving his appointments to certain jobs. Okay, and then the other jobs of the legislative branch. Now, the legislative branch has more jobs than any branch. And the reason they have more jobs than any branch is because there are 535 members of it. There's 435 in the House of Representatives. There's 100 in the Senate. So you've got 535 people. They can handle a lot of jobs. As we mentioned earlier in the semester when we were talking about the Constitution, Article 1, which is the legislative branch, is the longest of all the articles. And the reason it's the longest is because it's the biggest. Congress has more people in it. The next job of Congress is they raise money through taxes and other levies. They raise the revenue. Congress passes taxes on the American citizens, not the president. It's Congress. We'll find out later what the president does. The president can recommend stuff to Congress, but it's Congress in the end who passes taxes. So Congress is the one who raises the money. They raise the money. The president decides how to spend the money, and then Congress has to approve of that plan. Next thing that Congress does is they regulate interstate and foreign trade. When we trade with other countries around the world, Congress is the one that regulates that and keeps an eye on it and controls the trade. So when we trade with China, or if we trade with Russia or any other country in the world, Congress is the one that regulates that. Again, we're going to find out as we move through this that the president has to work with Congress on getting some stuff approved, and a lot of it deals with trade and money. They have to work together, but in the end, Congress gets to make the final decision on taxes, on how to spend the money for the United States, and then when it comes to regulating trade, that's up to Congress. And then the final job of the legislative branch is the legislative branch can declare war. If America goes to war with another country, if we go to war with Korea, or if we go to war with Russia, or if we go to war with anybody in the world, Congress is the one that declares war, not the president. The president controls the military. The president can decide how to use the troops and things like that. But if we go to war, it's up to Congress. Congress has to vote. They vote yes or no on a declaration of war and decide whether or not the United States should go to war. So again, those are the jobs, those are the powers of Congress. So what we looked at in this section of notes is we looked at the structure of the legislative branch. The structure is it's Congress, House of Representatives, Senate, bicameral, two houses. And then we looked at the powers of Congress and the powers of the legislative branch. There are 6 main powers that you need to know, and they're on those last 2 slides. Declare war, regulate trade, raise revenue, approve the budget, approve the president's selections, and the most important one, make laws. It's going to be very important for you to remember those powers as we move through the other parts of government when we get into the state and local. Because when we talk about the state government in Virginia, the state legislative branch in Virginia does a lot of the same jobs as Congress, just for Virginia. So the only thing that will be different will be the structure. So it's very important for you to again, keep these powers and keep these things in mind as we move forward. Because again, we're going to be looking at the three branches of government a lot, and we'll be looking at the three levels of government. The three branches are legislative, executive, and judicial. The three levels are national, state, and local. In fact, I'll write those up on the board right now and diagram that so you can see that. Okay, so again, we have three levels and we have three branches, and that's what we're going to be looking at from this point forward. The three branches of government are legislative, executive, and judicial. They're, again, diagrammed up on the wall. The three levels are national, state, and local. And what we are looking at right now in SOL 6 will be the national. When we get to SOL 7, we'll be looking at the state, and then in SOL 8, we'll be focusing on the local government. So again, that's what we'll be looking at over the next few weeks, next few days as we move through the branches of government. Again, if you missed any of this, you can go back and rewatch it. The PowerPoint notes will also be uploaded onto your Google Classroom. So again, and just to prove that I'm actually here teaching, there you go.